we're looking at water issues in South Africa. Perhaps on the back of a statement that was delivered in the National Assembly on water security this week, Minister Pemmy Majodina noted that while there was no immediate national threat, certain parts of the country face localized shortages due to resource mismanagement, leaks, and population growth. It has been just over 100 days as well in office for the new minister under the 7th administration. Following the water restrictions on Thursday in Gauteng this week, and with the possibility of level 2 restrictions being implemented, Benoit le Roy, SA Water Chamber CEO, joins us to assess the challenges which lie ahead for the province and the country at large, but also just how to navigate ahead. Benoit, good morning on that note, and thank you for your time in the SABC at this hour.
Morning, welcome.
Level 2 water restrictions for Gauteng. Thursday, there was that restriction between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m., water being reduced following upgrades a few months ago, but also just 100 days in office. A lot's been happening in this department, but also for the country at large. Talk to us about what you're observing, the impacts that the different phases have had, and your concerns.
So the level 1 restriction imposed for Gauteng by Rand Water is roughly a 10% reduction in the water it delivers to the Gauteng metros and municipalities. The big focus on the metros, and that's a reduction of I think between 10 and 20% of the volume they can pump. Hence, the municipalities have had to, for example, in Joburg, there's 25% over their permit or their license, has had to impose this 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. Throttling, which is because Johannesburg is so far ahead, but it's got the biggest leaks. So, by restricting those flows, that has the biggest impact, but it's not for the entire Johannesburg. And the areas that were mentioned were in actual fact quite new to me, because it was, generally speaking, Joburg CBD, the surrounding suburbs like Berea, etc., and Soweto and the likes. And I wouldn't have thought that those were the major demand or users, but the municipality said, they were. So the idea is to add so Rand Water provides the bulk water from its reservoirs to the Joburg reservoirs, and the Joburg reservoirs are then shut off at night in those areas, which means the line between Rand Water and Johannesburg's reservoir stays full, but the reservoir level is allowed to build up, and that's the main aim, so that by 4 o'clock in the morning, it can start refilling the system. The problem is downstream of the reservoir, if those systems run dry, which they generally speaking do, you have water hammer, and then it's going to take hours, sometimes days, to refill it. So I don't know what else can be done, but that's the reality of the situation. Going to level 3, level 2 means 30% reduction in Rand Water's volume delivered to Gauteng. That will be serious outages and throttling to try and keep the reservoir levels up. So, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, and the dams have water.
And so speaking of which, I want to now look at water throttling, but also the enforcement taken by municipalities, its efficacy as a deterrent as well. Talk to us about that in relation to the consumption that we have, per litres per capita, per day, compared to international averages as well. What are you witnessing there?
So we're below the world average, and believe it or not, the DG agrees with me, because the way it's measured globally in the water balance is you take the total water delivered to a community divided by the amount of people. So, and that's where they get to 270 or 280 litres per person. You have to subtract off that, because in other areas of the world, they've got 5 to 15% non-revenue water. If you deduct the non-revenue water, we get to below 125 to 175. So we're below the 160 world average. The municipalities are the biggest users and abusers of water. And so one's got to be careful when we put those numbers there, because the demand is driven by municipal leaks, but also growing population, etc. And I think the inability to be able to maintain infrastructure is now being palmed off onto the user, which is not really honorable in any sense. But what we have to do as a user, we have to reduce our usage, because we'll all run out together. And that we can't allow to happen. So what we've got to do is target the areas So I think a lot of the areas where credit control has lapsed and so-called free water is free for everybody as opposed to indigent users, that over 30 years, that discipline and governance structure has actually collapsed. So we have to reinstate it, and that's where the pushback is from, from the communities. But we have to reinstate who uses what water, because the 6 cubic meters per household that's free for indigents is not the problem if that's controlled. But I believe it's not controlled at all. So It's a free for all, and Johannesburg is owed a lot of money, and the municipalities in South Africa in general are behind by 29 billion rand paying water boards. So we have to address a multitude of issues, but the decrepit infrastructure is going to be abused even further and put under more stress as we throttle. So it's a very difficult situation to navigate, but we have to navigate it.
Thank you for touching on the municipal debt concerns into the billions, over 20 billion was highlighted as by the minister by the end of August 2024. But, Minister Senzo Mchunu last year, under the previous administration, had mentioned that there was going to be a national water crisis committee that had been set up. And so just looking at the interventions, political will as well. What are you observing on that front? I'm asking this because beyond the debt, there's water issues of water leakages that obviously is part of the problem. There's maintenance, there's infrastructure issues as well. We're entering the summer season. How do we mitigate against all of these compounding issues?
So behind me, you'll see we have a perfect storm brewing. And I know it's a rainy season in Gauteng, etc., but it's really on the backdrop of that business is through Business for South Africa, Business Unity is busy. They've added water now at the last moment to the agenda with national government. But the issue is not really there, because national government has got various policies. There's about a dozen of them, and the last is the National Infrastructure Plan 2050, where private sector participation, etc., water service provider licensing, all of these are catered for. But local government hasn't embraced the national government policies yet. And the question is, because local government is independent from a water perspective, as they are constitutionally the water service authorities and de facto water service providers, it's quite a quandary for national government on a large scale to impose the policies. And that's the problem with the architecture. Architecture is archaic. It might have been fine 30 years ago, done with good intent. I don't believe it actually fits. So it's going to change. And the previous minister, Mr. Mchunu, was busy changing it. And then a lot of things have been delayed in Parliament at the moment with elections and the delays and likes. So the licensing regime at local government has to be legislated now, because that will force performance. So for you to have a license as a water service provider, you have to be able to collect the money to be able to deliver the water. And if you don't, we will go to alternatives, which are things like private sector participation, etc. So it won't be denationalizing or privatizing, but encouraging the private sector. And we're seeing that a rapprochement of the private sector with government is happening. And in Gauteng, there's a dashboard now where weekly figures are brought in. So everybody's coming to the table, but we're still at the table. We're not in the field, in the workshops, doing the work. And we have to accelerate that. And that, to me, is the difficult issue. But we're moving in the right direction, slowly but surely.
Okay, well, Benoit, I know there are plenty more questions and answers at this point, but the clock is ticking. And obviously, we're looking at where to from here. Thanks for your time on the SABC at this hour. Benoit le Roy, SA Water Chamber CEO, speaking about water issues in South Africa. This week, Gauteng having experienced water restrictions. Of course, also just looking at that bigger picture, the ramifications of it all, as South Africa is rated amongst the top 30 water scarce nations in the world. Thanks to Benoit for joining us at this hour.